in obscurity and secretive waters of Vortex Spring, a secret that has confused specialists and jumpers for over 10 years hides underneath the surface. An existence where a trying jumper wandered into the obscure and stayed away forever. A reality where no signs or follows were left behind to make sense of his destiny. This is the story that has confused and enraptured jumpers as well as the overall population for north of 10 years. This is the narrative of Ben McDaniel, the one who disappeared. Above all, who was Ben McDaniel? Ben McDaniel was brought into the world on April 15, 1982. Shelby and Patty McDaniel as their most memorable child. His folks delighted in significant riches and had a place with Memphis, Tennessee in the U.S. This American jumper was the most established of the 4 children of the few, his kin being Paul, Tim, and Brad, and out of them, Paul was the one Ben imparted the most grounded cling to. McDaniel had an intense interest in scuba plunging, and it was this enthusiasm he had started at 15 years old. Not just had he gotten confirmations for untamed water jumps, yet in addition, he was attempting to get guaranteed as a cavern jumper too. Ben was, likewise, a stone climber lover too, alongside his more youthful sibling Paul. Notwithstanding the way that Ben's folks were exceptionally princely and bountiful in riches, Ben was having a definite inverse encounter. In the last part of the 2000s, he was wrestling with a truly troublesome and harsh period in the course of events of his life. His foreboding destiny started when he lost his more youthful sibling Paul, who was only 22 years of age. He was a continuous stone-climbing accomplice of McDaniel in their astonishing development years. Notwithstanding the age contrast, the team was exceptionally close and paid normal visits to one another to hang out. Sadly, the individual who tracked down Paul, oblivious in the family home, was Ben himself. He attempted to awaken him, yet without much of any result. And sometime, some other time, when the paramedics showed up, Paul was articulated dead on the scene because of a sad stroke. Ben's folks set forward a drive to assist individuals with comparable circumstances by setting up an establishment, and Ben was effectively partaking in the drive. Yet, then, much more unfortunately, the news spread out that the family had stowed away reality with regards to how really their child kicked the bucket. He didn't pass on from a stroke yet. Then again, what laid him to the deathbed was drug inebriation of benzos and sedatives. This inebriation caused encephalopathy, which then, at that point, prompted Paul's demise. This reality was uncovered by Paul's clinical inspector and his dissection. Paul was recommended Adderall, Seroquel, and Xanax. However, the admission of narcotics, which were not endorsed to him, caused his demise. Yet again, while Ben was grieving at his sibling's demise, setback went after him, and he needed to manage a hard separation simultaneously. As though this was sufficiently not, because of the financial decline in the last part of the 2000s, his development organizations began falling. Things deteriorated that he turned into a debt holder of $50,000 to the IRS and had to move back in with his guardians. These couple of years were really trying for Ben McDaniel, that he arrived at the mark of his life, where he needed to begin another life and accomplish things that he needed to. His folks offered him to go live in Florida at their oceanside house while he will be taking a vacation. He at last moved to Florida in 2009. Things appeared to be getting better with Ben. At the point when he moved to Florida, there, he had the option to seek after his high school enthusiasm, that was scuba plunging. He became fixated on the game since he had a lot of chance to investigate it while residing at the oceanside house during his expert leave. Regardless of a great deal of jumping spots in Florida, one specific neighborhood spot grabbed Ben's attention. In spite of the fact that Ben was living right close there, coast, he had an inclination for making a plunge freshwater. There is a wealth of freshwater springs in Florida, yet even among this multitude of springs, Vortex Spring is somewhat extraordinary. Vortex Spring is ideal for any jumper. It isn't simply the biggest plunging office in Florida, yet it brags of water that is really clear and simple to swim through and a temperature that isn't cold enough to require hardware further developed than a wetsuit. The upper piece of the spring is very much utilized by fledgling jumpers to foster their ability. What's more, it even has an enormous cavern framework, which is a tomfoolery challenge for any accomplished jumper. Computing from the water's surface, the spring stretches out down to 60 feet, which opens up into the cave that novice jumpers use. That cave goes for around 300 feet further and down to the profundity of 115 feet. What's more, that was where you'd find a steel rebar entryway that blocks off access to the cavern framework that is saved exclusively for the most capable of jumpers. The jumpers who wish to investigate the cavern, which is the further segment of the Vortex Spring, need to show that they are cave-affirmed to get the way to get to this more profound part of this spring. The entryway was introduced during the 90s because of a specific explanation. The state had taken steps to boycott the spring through and through if a certain measure was not taken to keep the jumpers from going into the cavern on the grounds that the quantity of passings in the cavern had surpassed to north of 12. The explanation that the jumpers were all charmed to find the cavern was plain to see and unambiguous. It was estimated that the limestone sections were north of 48 meters that stretched out to a profundity of more than 310 feet, and surprisingly, more profound, yet the tight elements of the entry make it truly challenging to get to. Its restricted size makes a strong prevention to investigate the cavern further. A few entries are even estimated to be only 10 inches wide, where maritime specialists might have to eliminate their fuel tanks and take part in curving and twisting developments to explore through such restricted space. In the wake of residing with his folks for half a month in Tennessee, Ben McDaniel got back to the oceanside house, which was possessed by his well-off guardians, situated in Steenick Roseau on 18th of August. The jump shop workers of the Vortex Spring had become intimately acquainted with Ben, as well as had different jumpers who paid incessant visits to the spring. His truck was much of the time found in the parking area, while Ben was either at the waterside or was plunging. He had likewise met another sweetheart, Emily Greer, who shared his adoration for the sea. In spite of lacking legitimate confirmation, Ben was an ordinary at Vortex Spring. He had investigated the cavern at Vortex Spring a few times, frequently without paying the extra charge or marking the logbook. He had purchased costly gear and had professed to have arrived at profundities of 300 feet. He had likewise drawn guides of the cavern and communicated his longing to view as a new section that he trusted existed past a thin limitation. His unapproved plunges and covered-up and secret endeavors into the prohibited cavern set up for a misfortune holding on to unfurl. At around early afternoon, he went to the Vortex Spring, denoting his most memorable plunge for the afternoon. During the plunge, his kindred jumpers had seen him investigating the passage entry of the cavern, and his extraordinary investigation of the entryway proposed an arranging stage, as though he was forming a particular game plan. After a range of time, Ben was seen leaving the water as he surfaced, and afterward continuing to top off his tanks in the plunge shop of the Vortex Spring. He devoted the rest of his early evening time sticking around the shore, really taking a look at his stuff and writing down something in what seemed, by all accounts, to be his plunge logs. This large number of exercises were caught by the surveillance cameras introduced inside the plunge shop. The next night was somewhat hot and boiling, and Ben appeared to be getting ready for another jump. The cavern ensured jumpers who needed to experience and explore the cavern were required a consent to enter by the jump shop workers. The workers knew that Ben neither had the testament nor the consent. However, they had solid doubts for some time now that Ben had been advancing into the cavern deceptively as well as subtly by constraining the door open. The evening of 18th August, one of the jump shop representatives chose to swim down with Ben and open the entryway for him. The two of them passed the scandalous indication of the Harvester of Souls, with something written in huge striking letters, the word "Stop," as they swam into the enormous cavern at the lower part of the Vortex Spring. It was the absolute most conspicuous sign in the plunging scene for certain evident measurements about the quantity of jumpers who had been laid to the deathbed in the cavern. Just beneath the word "Stop," this sign was most certainly not an issue for Ben, as he had currently expressed that he needed to investigate the cavern more, and he had been there a great deal of times before as well. The pair arrived at the steel entryway in the wake of following the sign, and the worker opened the door for Ben to crush his direction under the overhanging limestone, giving him a kind of legitimate admittance to investigate the cavern. The worker chose to tap out and return to the shop as opposed to sitting around idly for Ben, similar to they once in a while exposed of kindness, to be sure they were under no commitment to sit around idly for the jumper. At times they remained to pause, here and there they didn't. Supposedly yet, this was it no more. Anybody had at any point seen Ben. The workers guaranteed that Ben had entered the Votex Spring cave at around 7:30 p.m. Furthermore, didn't emerge by 9:00 p.m. when they shut the shop. They said they left a note on his truck, requesting that he check in with them when he returned. The next morning, his truck was viewed as still left at a similar spot in the parking garage. The parking garage was at that point very packed that day, and since everybody was engrossed with their own errands, his non-appearance was to a great extent inconspicuous. Then following 2 days, on Friday, individuals began seeing that his truck had been left at similar spot for 2 days in a row. Not just did the truck not move even an inch from where it was left 2 days prior. However, they likewise understood that they had not seen Ben around the spring or in the shop. It was by then that they contacted Ben McDaniel's folks, who lived someplace close to the Vortex Spring, and called upon the police to send off an examination concerning his vanishing. The starting pursuit was led by the Holmes Area Sheriff's Office, the Florida Fish and Natural Life Preservation Commission, and the Jackson District Sheriff's Office Plunge Group. They tracked down no proof of Ben past the entryway and presumed that he could never have entered the neglected region because of his size and absence of involvement. What's more, this is where things additionally start to get strangely bizarre. The spring was fixed off by the police to ensure nobody had the option to intrude without their insight. The inquiry started. The police started looking through the region of the spring, as well as Ben's truck, in order to uncover signs and his possessions. Regardless of the careful endeavors, no hint of his tanks, his wetsuit, or any of his other hardware was found. They discovered a portion of his effects in the truck that remembered his wallet with $1,100 for cash, his jump logs, as well as his wireless. Something truly captivating and valuable was his logs, wherein he had planned the region of the cavern he had investigated. Succeeding that, they visited his folks' oceanside house, which was his momentum home, just to track down his ravenous canine inside. The canine seemed to have done without nourishment for no less than 2 days, totally lining up with the time Ben was remembered to have vanished from. Considering this data, the police as well as the shop representatives were very disposed to accept that Ben was still in the cavern, and it seemed like he had suffocated. The pursuit was gone on by the acquaintance of corpse canines, with Search the Region. The canines were found, reliably directing police to the outer layer of water, which appeared to approve the conviction that Ben had entered the cavern and never emerged. The news spread quickly in the jumpers' local area like a backwoods fire, and the cavern jumpers of all levels elected to help look for Ben's body. The overarching supposition was that the pursuit would be centered around body recuperation. From the outset, the police invited the impressive help, expecting an extensive quick pace of the inquiry endeavors. In any case, as additional jumpers participated, they alerted the police about the troublesome difficulties related with the activity. The mix of profundity, restricted burrows, and that's what silty circumstances intended, assuming any accident occurred. It might actually prompt the need of recuperating 2 dead bodies rather than 1. Eventually, the world's most capable jumpers started looking through the cavern completely, while Ben's folks and his better half were in many cases sitting along the edge of Spring for any indication of Ben. The hunt in the first, not many days, was completely disposed towards huge and little passages, and afterward they continued to turn their concentration towards minuscule hole and crevices. In any case, regardless of all the difficult work and endeavors, the main things they could find were 3 gas chambers that were accepted to have a place Ben. The unusual truth was that every one of the 3 tanks contained normal air, while somewhere around one of it, the tanks ought to have contained a unique combination of gas, not the same as conventional air, due to the profundity he was jumping to. At such profundities, a jumper utilizing normal air becomes powerless against nitrogen narcosis. Given Ben's insight, clear from his jump log showing different sections into the cavern, it is plausible that he knew about this gamble. It's exceptionally near unthinkable that he would have endured his previous jumps, assuming he had such ordinary air in the tanks. Similar to it was tracked down in the pursuit. Salvage endeavors were only truly befuddled by the disclosure. It had been 4 days now, by Sunday, following Ben's vanishing. The legend, Ed Sorensen, who was a renowned and very much regarded cave jumper and educator, was reached by somebody from the hunt party. The educator, after getting the message, was on a Bahamas campaign, yet following, he dropped all that and arrived at Florida the following day. At the point when he came to, the other ocean adventurers and jumpers informed him that going past than they had previously gone was way too hazardous. Ed declined their evaluation and continued on to make 3 separate jumps for the inquiry. Sorensen investigated 1,700 feet of the cavern, outperforming Ben's planned distance by somewhere around 200 feet. He even utilized a plunge-drive vehicle to travel quicker and more modest tanks to explore restricted spaces. Regardless of his careful endeavors, he didn't find anything, no body, no hardware, and surprisingly, no indications of expanded fish movement from fish that could have been benefiting from something rotting someplace in the cavern. With each ensuing lead coming to an impasse, Ben's folks got increasingly frantic. They were ready to take a stab at everything, without exception, for replies about what could have occurred. In the first place, they employed the one who initially planned the cavern to attempt to track down him, yet 7 plunges later, all he had the option to offer them was a statement of regret for don't tracking down anything. Then, they set up $50,000 as a store for the expense for supplanting a remotely worked submerged vehicle. This vehicle was then used to look through the cavern, yet sadly couldn't go any farther than whatever the human jumpers had gone. At the point when the hunt was at last slowing down from the underlying free-for-all, 16 jumpers had spent 36 days in a row, yet turned up with nothing. With how all through the pursuit of the cavern had been, it began to appear to be doubtful that he was in there, all things considered. His folks presently solidly trusted that in the event that Ben wasn't in the cavern, he was reasonable the survivor of treachery. While this was all going on, they had employed a confidential specialist to investigate the plunge shop and its workers. This examiner wound up figuring out that few of the workers had criminal records, and that the proprietor was as of now having to deal with serious criminal penalties. Close to this time, different elective hypotheses started to arise. Like, for instance, on the off chance that we think from another point, maybe his body was taken out before the hunt was started. It is conceivable that he suffocated, yet out of worry that Spring could confront results. In any event, prompting a boycott, different jumpers might have extricated him before his vanishing was even identified. Another hypothesis proposed that Ben could have been cleaned out through one of the Spring's outlets. In any case, when the police looked through the bogs that were associated with the springs, yet again, outpourings, they tracked down no hints of him. Another hypothesis, which was advanced by a few people, was that Ben had perhaps faked his own vanishing. It was referenced that the pressure of ongoing years could have driven him to look for a new beginning, away from the spot where individuals knew him, in this way organizing his evaporating act. Notwithstanding, the hypothesis appears. Yet again, outpourings, they tracked down no hints of him. Another hypothesis, which was advanced by a few people, was that Ben had perhaps faked his own vanishing. It was referenced that the pressure of ongoing years could have driven him to look for a new beginning, away from the spot where individuals knew him, in this way organizing his evaporating act. Notwithstanding, the hypothesis appears to look bad since he was content with his new sweetheart and was improving as he kept living in Florida, continuing on from his siblings' passing. He had even examined his arrangements for a plunge-related business with his better half and had left a genuine letter for his folks prior to going out, offering thanks for their help and promising to deal with them in their advanced age. He understood what influence his siblings' passing had on his folks. It simply looked bad for him to vanish and pass on them to lament at his vanishing as well. At least, this was the viewpoint shared by Ben's folks and his sweetheart. These speculations lead to an impasse, as there is an absence of any strong proof to demonstrate them right. In the last investigation, before the pursuit was cancelled, jumping legend Jill Heinerth researched Ben's vanishing. She needed to make a short film for Ben's guardians to give them some conclusion, however, subsequent to digging into the subtleties and investigating the cavern herself, her perspective moved. The short film developed into a full-length narrative, and Jill currently immovably accepts that Ben is without a doubt someplace inside the cavern. Preceding this narrative, she was of the assessment that Ben wasn't in the cavern, in view of all that she knew. In obscurity and strange waters of Vortex Spring, the riddle of Ben McDaniel's fate stays perplexing. What happened on that doomed plunge that caused him to evaporate suddenly? The resonations of unanswered inquiries torment the personalities of the individuals who look for them. Truth: Ben's story actually remains covered in secret. We actually don't have a definitive response for what has been going on with him or his body. Regardless of things appearing to get better for him, he recently vanished. What's more, in spite of the different prizes, his body was rarely found. In any case, he will be recollected, and ideally, later on, jumpers will guarantee to keep up with appropriate security guidelines and log every one of their plunges, as well as where they are going. Anyway, what might have happened to Ben? Might it be said that he was killed? Or on the other hand, would he say he was a survivor of any treachery? Did he go missing of his own will? Or on the other hand, did he stall out in the cavern of Vortex Spring for eternity? Ideally, one day, this secret gets settled, and this story finally accepts reality for what it so legitimately merits. With that, I leave you. On the off chance that you partook in this video, I trust you'll think about leaving a like and buying in for more satisfied this way. What's more, as usual, gratitude for watching.